Welcome to the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast, hosted by David Mandell, an attorney, author, and OJM Group partner. We share real-world financial lessons from physicians and insights from experts to impact your bottom line. Check the show notes to get a free copy of our newest book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Now, over to David.
Hey folks, welcome to the episode. I'm David Mandell, the host. Thanks for joining us either here on YouTube and looking at me, or more likely, most of you on the podcast platforms and listening. This is kind of part two of a dive into locum tenens, and we've got Cory Kleinschmidt back on. For those of you who didn't listen or watch or can't remember his bio, I'm going to give you that now, and then we'll bring him on and kind of continue our conversation. And if you missed the first one, go back and listen to that. We talk about sort of where locums comes from, both the term, you can get some history on that. It goes back to like the 1500s, but also we get into what the industry is, what kind of specialties are quite common in there, and which ones are growing, what folks have to look out for, and a little bit about the trend in the industry, big picture. So today we're going to talk about, let's say you want to get started in this. What are some things that you should know about, and what are kind of some success factors or red flags to avoid, digging into real specifics for physicians. So let me tell you about Cory first. Cory is an entrepreneur and longtime industry veteran who has worked for and consulted with multiple locum tenens staffing agencies of every size and in various roles over the past 23 years. He also has a physician son, at least one, in training. We talked about that in episode 1. Most notably, Cory served as a director of digital strategy for Jackson Healthcare and VP of marketing for interim physicians. During his tenure at Jackson, he created the in-house marketing services division, helped name the organization, and architected and managed the locumtenens.com job board, which execs have credited for being the engine that helped LT.com grow into the powerhouse it is today. He is the founder and operator of Locumpedia, the Locum Tenens industry platform. We also talked about that a lot in episode 1, and the No BS guide, which we'll link again in this episode show notes as well, but you can go back and listen to what that's all about as well. So with that, Cory, welcome back. Excellent. Okay. So this episode is going to be a little bit more about like in the weeds about like, I'm a doc and I'm interested in this. So, what's the first thing a doc should do if they want to venture into locums work? Where would they start?
Well, it's a potentially fairly long laundry list of must-do items before getting into locum tenens.
First, go to locumpedia.com. That's where to start, right? I mean,
go to Locumpedia, right? That's where I was going to start. Of course, thank you for the plug.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I mean, our mission is to demystify locum tenens for providers. The No BS guide is sort of like, a handbook for everything you need to know about getting into it. And of course, getting into it is like anything you're starting out with, that's complex and it has a lot of details and moving parts. It takes time to really get your hands around everything. And of course, because it relates to a physician's career, you want to do your diligence before taking the plunge, and doing so up front. Like so many things in life, coming up with a plan leads to more success later on. And to develop that plan, you want to get out there and absorb as much information as you can about what this kind of medical practice entails, what the business considerations are, how it can dovetail with your own life ambitions about starting a family or deciding where to settle. So definitely read as much as you can up front, not just the No BS guide, but there's a lot of other really valuable sources. But on Locumpedia, we do publish a biweekly news roundup we call Locum CME, Locum Tenens Continuing Medical Education, where we round up the the most important news um, within the industry, related industries such as artificial intelligence. We cover that pretty heavily because it is going to have such a huge impact on medicine in the future. I mean, obviously it's going to affect all aspects of society and business, but it has a pretty particular application when it comes to medical care. So it's changing rapidly, and we think it's important to chronicle the evolution of AI and how docs are using it and best practices that are emerging. So we really cast a wide net to uh, bring physicians these news roundups. We put a lot of effort into them, and we get a lot of good feedback on them. We also have a newsletter docs can sign up for to get our new issues delivered by email, as well as any other stories that we publish. So it's a constantly changing thing, and we're the only one really doing this, chronicling the industry's evolution and growth for providers. So beyond that, like anything, you want to talk to people who have done it, um, getting firsthand testimonials and experiences from other physicians who have tried locum tenens, uh, learn about what worked for them, what didn't work for them, what it's like to work for a staffing firm, what it's like to be away from your family potentially, um, for what could be a fairly lengthy amount of time. um, all kinds of things. What goes into what makes locum tenens work? It's not just knowing how it works, but also understanding how it what it means to you, and how it can complement your career path, and whether you want to take that route or not. But there's a lot of business considerations as well. So we touched upon it in previous episode where doctors who work on a locum tenens basis are essentially independent contractors. They're
Right.
freelancers.
Yeah, we talked.
And so if you're a freelancer, you may be familiar with gig work, and uh, professionals who do gig work are responsible for paying their own taxes because they're not working for an employer holding them out. Obviously, a lot of docs do locums as a side hustle or moonlighting and things like that. So, they have their existing um, uh, you know, taxes held out from their full-time uh, jobs, but also then need to understand what it means for them to have this side income. A lot of docs actually start LLCs,
That's right. We talked
so
about
they
that.
can,
Yeah.
yeah, so they can get a good start, taking advantage of the tax breaks that come with, um, business deductions and things like that. So, you want to learn as much as you can about the business considerations. Um,
And let me ask you about the agency. So, we talked a little bit of that in the first episode. There's really three main parties, right? There's the physician, there's the locum tenens agency, which is staffing agency. Then there's the ultimate, employer, even though you're not getting employed contracting. Um, What's, one piece of advice from sorting through the hundreds of agencies? Meaning, are you going to the job and then whoever's associated with the agency is important to connect with an agency first, see what jobs they have? Um, how does a doc sort of, get through evaluating and figuring out what agency I want to work with, if any?
Well, some docs do work locum tenens directly for facilities. It's not terribly common, but it is possible. In fact, we're working on a story with a client where the full time W-2 radiologist, again continuing the radiology theme of our
Yeah.
discussion, um, converted from a W-2 employee to a locum tenens 1099 independent contractor. So it is possible to go direct with the employer, although it is not nearly as common as going through a staffing firm. It's sort of like anything you think about when it comes to concierge service. You can do a lot of things on your own, but there's a lot of benefits and a lot of pros uh, in offloading. We do our groceries on Instacart. We can go to the grocery store and buy them if we have to, but for a small fee, we can have them come to us, and it's a service that we can take advantage of to save ourselves time and hassle. So, the staffing firms really handle all, and I mean all of the non-clinical aspects of medical practice. So, you sit back and relax and let them do the work, let them find the jobs for you. And that's typically how it goes. In
So,
terms of
so typically, you as a physician would say, "Hey, I got recommended by another doc to this agency. So now I'm going to work with this agency. You're going to say, this is the kind of jobs I'm sort of looking for, Northeast, Southeast, 1 day a week, 1 month at a time, whatever the parameters are. And then they go out and will come back to you with opportunities. Is that normally how it works?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And the staffing firms, they're broken down by two different divisions. They have the recruiting division, which is the one that interacts with the doctors, presents opportunities to them, asks them if they're interested in learning more. There's no such thing as an application, a job application. It's more about um, uh, expressing interest, more like a lead for the agency. The position becomes a lead, um, to basically to continue the conversation, because these jobs are obfuscated. They don't want to give away that where the hospital is located, because
Good.
that's how the staffing firm makes their money, by representing that opportunity to the physician. If they publicly identify where, so it's a dance of
Right.
sorts. They don't want to give away too much information because that's a proprietary business info, and they don't want their competitors to swoop in and say, "Hey, we'll charge less to fill this job." Um, so that's kind of how it works from that perspective. But like you mentioned, David, there's a lot of it's a large and growing industry now. Estimates are that there are 200 locum tenens agencies, and so that can be kind of daunting to figure out where to start. As with so many other things, when you're deciding what to purchase, look at the online reviews of other experiences from docs who've worked with that firm, talk to colleagues, see what their experience is, whether they would recommend the firm they worked with or not. Um, and you know, there are there are large staffing firms, there are small firms, there are specialized firms that only, like, we work with a company that only does oncology staffing.
Mhm.
Um, there are there's an ear, nose, and throat
Right.
to laryngology staffing firm. There's a number of anesthesia specialized firms. So, you want to think about what's important to you. Do you want to have a more personal touch? Then, maybe you want to go with a smaller agency. If you don't really care about that, you just want little as interaction as possible, then maybe a larger firm that represents more opportunities and can deliver a new assignment, a locum tenens assignment, and quicker. Maybe that's the way to go. But there's no one size fits all thing. A lot of these agencies say they staff all specialties. In reality, you can look at see which jobs they have more of, and that tends to be the kinds of opportunities they have on a more regular basis. Um, Feedback, like anything, if you're working for a larger company, you'll often hear that it's more of a numbers business to them, and they look at least that's the perception by a lot of doctors who work with these firms. The critique is that it's a transaction for them
Yeah, you're
as opposed
just
to
you're your revenue producing unit, and they can put you in, et cetera. They're not trying to get to know you personally. Then one thing
right.
you mentioned there, I wanted to jump in, was you said no application, but there is a need to put together like a resume or a CV. Some of those things do matter, right? Those are some things that the docs going to need to put together to put their best foot forward. Isn't that right?
That's correct. And the CV, obviously all doctors have CVs, but if you want to get into locum tenens work, there's a specific format that you want to follow in
Yeah.
structuring the CV. You want to list Obviously, the standard stuff like your medical education, where you did your internship, fellowship, all that good stuff. Any certifications that you have, special skills. Um, but the locum tenens CV format is really focused on the work history. You want to document everywhere you've worked, be very specific with the dates. You want to have references on there, who you worked with, who can vouch for you. Um, there are some templates you can find online that'll get you started. But that really helps the recruiter at a staffing firm know who you are, know how to sell you. So you
Right.
need to tell them, um, give them the tools that they can sell you with. If you want to look at it that from that perspective,
Right.
you're an asset. You bring a lot to the table. Here's what you offer, and tell them, give them arm them with the information they can take to the hospital and say like, hey, we've got this guy or a woman who has a lot of experience with intubation or whatever it might be, um, within a specialty, a special skill. That's something that can help you get a job faster. So tell your story utilizing a standard format, and that really can go a long way to helping you succeed in locum tenens.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another thing I saw, and again, I keep coming back to the last episode, but I started this with, my father spent a good portion of the second half of his career doing a lot of locums work around. And I told the story about him and my mother, and they worked from, a number of states. And so, and my father, my parents relocated from Massachusetts and Rhode Island, where I grew up, to Florida. And changing the licensing, getting credentialed in Florida, and then a bunch of other states where he wanted to go work, and it made him valuable because they were willing to do these jobs and also had the licenses. So, if someone's getting into locums, um, tell me about that. I mean, obviously, if they're in California, a big state, they might say, "Listen, I'm only going to work in California where I'm already licensed, and I'm looking for jobs in California," and that makes sense. But I imagine there's a lot of folks who, if they really are making this strategic business decisions, like it makes sense to invest some time and some money to get licensed in other states so they can get more, job offers, more opportunities, especially if they reside in a small state where there just isn't that much.
Mhm.
So, what's your experience in that? How much do they have to do that on their own? How much does the agency help them? Because I know that's a lot of paperwork and headaches, and you're dealing with, state governments at that point, right? So,
Yeah.
getting the licenses. So, give me your, 2 minutes thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Locum tenens is great, being able to travel, and if you're into skiing, to be able to travel to Utah or Colorado and practice on the weekends while or work during the week and ski during the weekends. You have to be licensed in Colorado, and it does take a long time to get licensed in states. But there's a couple of things that are happening that are making that process somewhat easier. Obviously, when you're starting out, do your research. Like, one of the questions to ask yourself is, well, where would I want to work?
Right.
What's important to me in my life? Do I want to spend winters at the beach? Well, you have to do your homework and prepare for that. And a key part of that is getting the license there.
Right.
Um, so one of the things that's changing, as you mentioned, David, is that a lot of agencies are seeing the value in assisting doctors with their licensure. And so if a staffing firm is offering to assist with that, you should consider taking them up on it. My impression is that that really only happens with um, with with doctors that an agency has a good relationship with,
Right.
or a work history with. Maybe the doctor has done 6 locum tenens assignments over a year or so, and they're a known quantity, reliable, and all that. Um, and maybe they have a client they're working with that can't get enough emergency medicine docs, and maybe they say, a lot of times the actual hospital will also assist with licensing. So, that's something to look into after you've gained more experience. But build build toward that if that's important to you to practice in different states. That can really go a long way to maximizing what's called in the industry the locum tenens lifestyle. Um, like anything, you have to do your homework to achieve it, but
Right.
once you've done it, it's really phenomenal. The other thing is there's something called the Interstate Medical Licensing Compact, the IMLC. This is, as it sounds, it's a compact among different states that and I'm not 100% sure what relationships are, but let's say, you're licensed in New Jersey, but not in New York, but because they're so close together, those states have a relationship that they understand how, Jersey's state licensing board operates, and they know it's above board, so to speak, and they think that they understand that their standards are pretty equivalent to what you would expect in New York. So I think there are maybe 30 states now. So it's grown and more states join every year. So if you're licensed in one state, it's reciprocal oftentimes in another state. So that's something to look into.
Yeah, for sure. I know as an attorney, that's the case with bar membership.
Mm.
There's, I don't know how many numbers, but it's maybe about half the states have reciprocity. Of course, the states, that you would think that are the most attraction for whatever reason, like a California or a Florida, are not part of that. So you have to retake the bar if you're going to, it's a whole major process. It's not like the medical license is better than that. You don't have to go, retake the board, although, there may be some tests involved. But again, do your research, figure out. I think, one of the things you've been saying in both these episodes is, you know, and it makes sense. This is sort of a lifestyle in some ways. This is a goal. This is a personal, how do you want to live? Decision, and you can get ahead of that if you think that you might want to be in the mountains. Start that process early, and know that that's just part of the your sort of your business plan for getting into this area of medicine. So let's say now you found an agency that you like. They've got you out for opportunities. You've licensed in that state, or maybe it's in somewhere else in your same state, and now they say, "Okay, you've got a job." There's some kind of contract, I assume, that comes along. Is there something that they need to, review, have reviewed? Is that come from the ultimate, like, hospital or employer? Or is that already taken care of by the agency? What's involved in that kind of, deal?
Yeah, great question. Before I address that, wanted
Yeah,
to kind of just briefly mention the credentialing and licensing aspect of
sure.
it. So, also, what the staffing firms will do is they'll handle your credential. So, the
So
one
once you're
this
licensed in the state, let's say, they'll work on, like, getting you credentialed for that position.
right, and it's unique to the facility. So you have to be credentialed not in the state. You have to be credentialed at that facility,
Right.
and you have to repeat that process with every facility you work where you work a locum tenens assignment. So that's again a value add that the agency provides. They will take all of you know, you- uh, your credentials, all your paperwork, your documents, um, and they will run background checks and they will thoroughly vet provider to make sure that they have a clean malpractice history, or if there is a history, there's like an explanation behind it. So there are a lot of moving parts with the paperwork there, but again, the doctor just needs to turn it all over to the staffing firm, and then they'll take it from there and work with the facility to get that provider credentialed. Um, uh,
I know we're gonna get to the contract in a second, but in related to the credentialing for the insurance, is that typically also kind of provided as part of the, deal? Like, I'm coming to work at hospital X, for 3 weeks. They cover not only cover the cost, but actually put in place the insurance, so I don't have to go shop around trying to find a 3-week insurance policy for this hospital. Is that right?
Correct. Again, the agencies will handle everything except the non-clinical work, including medical malpractice
Okay.
coverage. So that's another thing you want to ask. Providers will want to ask the staffing firm is what kind of malpractice coverage they offer. There are a couple of different kinds, and the situation may, which not all firms offer the same kind.
Right.
So that's something to look into. But generally speaking, yes, that the provider, the doctor will work under the policy that the staffing firm has with the malpractice
I got it. Okay. Interesting.
carrier.
Okay. So they don't normally they don't the doc has to they might have to say, okay, what kind of policy you have, ask that question and make sure that they're okay with it, but they don't have to go shop around. It should be
Mm,
something that is provided as part of the turnkey kind
That's
of
right.
program. Okay. Yeah. And so let's get back to the contract for a second. So there's some kind of contract. Is there negotiation? Is it kind of just sign here? Or how does that typically work?
Yeah, there often is negotiation. They're typically called locum tenens agreements. I mean, they are contracts. They're legal documents. Um, and it's the contract. The agreement is between the staffing firm and the doctor,
I see.
not with.
That's the
So
parties. Okay.
yeah, and on the other side, the staffing firm also they do have a contract with the
But
health
they might have a
plans.
master agreement with the employer that covers like all their deals, all the people they're gonna bring in, but you're gonna sign as a physician an agreement with you and the staffing agency, generally.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
And there is negotiation involved. The business model for the industry is very simple. Just to boil it down to its essence, if the staffing firm is is charging a hospital $100 per hour. I mean, it's the average is much more than that. You know,
Let's
it's
just call it 100
200
just to keep the
to
numbers.
300 per hour. And then in turn, so it's a margin business. The staffing firm then pays the doctor, um, a percentage of that, and the margin differs depending on the staffing firm. Kind of back to the larger agencies, they tend to play more hardball and charge as have a higher margin
Yep.
between the bill rate and the pay rate spread. And so if the staffing firm is charging the hospital $100 per hour and they're paying the doctor $70 per hour, the difference is the margin. That's their gross revenue, and that's the business model in a nutshell. So they will typically offer the doctor, the doctor doesn't know how much the staffing firm is charging the facility.
Sure.
But oftentimes there is negotiation involved. So they may say like, $70 is too low for me to make this worthwhile. I'll agree to 75. So there is some negotiation involved in that. Again, that's one of the things that the doctors should do their due diligence on to find out more about the business aspect of it. So the more knowledge they have
Right.
about, the average pay rate for,
Right.
a locum tenens radiologist, they can negotiate better with the staffing firm.
Right. And maybe that's a reason to use a smaller firm. Maybe they can get a better deal. The bigger
That's
firm
right.
stand pat because they have like an exclusive deal with the health system and they're like, you can't go around us and that kind of thing. So,
Yeah, they have a standard rate and that it is what it is. But
right.
yeah, a lot of the smaller staffing firms, they compete on price. I mean,
Right.
that's the only option as a smaller agency. And some of them have a margin as low as 15, maybe 20%. And whereas again, the standard margin seems to be in the industry of about 30 to 35%. And when it comes to these agreements, typically what's contained in them is what you might expect with perhaps some surprises. There's the scope of work, the provider's responsibilities, their duties, and obviously the location of the work site. It's called a work site. The compensation and payment terms. It outlines the pay rates, invoicing, reimbursement for travel, lodging, and malpractice. But typically that's covered. A lot of the staffing firms, um, they do cover all of the travel costs 100%, but some of the things like gas, um, which doesn't cost that much, or any other incidentals that they have to personally pay for, they can submit for reimbursement.
What about like housing? Like I'm going to go live somewhere for 3 months and do this job, or I'm going to go once a week to, um, this state to do this work. Is that laid out in the contract too? That it's, per diem X amount kind of thing
Correct.
for
Yep.
housing.
That's exactly right. Um, the staffing firm will cover the cost of the hotel completely for that time period. Or if it's a longer term assignment, they if the doctor requests it, they can also request an Airbnb, depending on what they're more comfortable with. So that is covered in these agreements. Um, as well as, we talked about the credentialing and licensing, that's outlined in the agreement. The shift duration, contract length, the potential for extensions. A lot of these assignments, and it's becoming more and more common, especially with, at least as it relates to some of our clients we work with for marketing purposes. A lot of facilities are extending docs well beyond the initial
Mm.
agreement period. If they like the doctor or the doctor likes the the hospital, the facility, they'll continue to extend it indefinitely, and sometimes it leads to a permanent role, um, or eventually it ends. But that's another thing that's specified: the potential for extensions. Standard contract, um, things like termination, cancellation. Does clarify the malpractice coverage offer, compliance and liability language, things like that.
Right.
Confidentiality clauses, non-compete. Some of them are non-compete agreements. So that's something, again, doctors want to educate themselves about. So they're going into it with their eyes wide open. And the more knowledge they have, the better they'll have a good experience, because not all doctors have a good experience because maybe they didn't.
They didn't understand what they were getting into.
Yeah, they didn't understand what they were signing up for, or maybe didn't quite, just maybe didn't even read the agreement. That
Yeah, I'm
happens.
sure. Believe me, we've talked about that on other episodes. So, um, yeah, that's really interesting. And, I want to wrap, but I want to tell folks, like we talked about in the first episode here of the two, your website, Locumpedia, we're going to put a link to that in the show notes. The No BS guide, it was where I got a lot of interesting information to set up these questions over the last two episodes, because it does kind of lay out that, if you're a doc, you want to get into this area, you should be getting that guide. I mean, it's just that simple. You want to start learning about what this is about. Um, as we talked about in the first episode, it's a growing area of medicine. There's a lot more younger docs getting into this than I thought, and that I knew about, and it's broadened in the different specialties. So spend some time on Locumpedia if you're interested. Get that guide. I think it's, I've seen it in my own family. My father had decades of interesting, and I think for him rewarding work in locums. And that's one of the reasons I wanted Corey on, and I wanted the listeners and viewers to hear about it. So it's part of medicine, and it's growing, and it's something you guys listening men and women should know about. So Corey, thank you so much for being
Great
on.
to be with you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for everybody tuning in, both video or audio. Of course, if you like the content, feel free to give us a 5-star review, say some nice words about us, tell your colleagues, and of course, in another 2 weeks, we'll have another episode for you. Thanks for tuning in.
The Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast is brought to you by OJM Group, a multidisciplinary wealth management firm dedicated to helping physicians build and preserve their wealth while reducing taxes. Episodes from previous seasons are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other popular platforms. Podcast listeners can get a free copy of our newest book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Simply text WPPOD to 844-418-1212 to request your free copy. Be sure to join David every 2 weeks for the newest episode of the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast. This podcast is being provided for informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions expressed on this show by Mr. Mandell and his guests do not constitute legal, tax, or investment advice or a recommendation of any particular security or strategy, and do not represent the opinions of the underwriters of this programming. Any information prepared from third-party sources is believed to be reliable, though its accuracy is not guaranteed. Opinions expressed in this commentary reflect subjective judgments of the speakers based on conditions at the time of recording and are subject to change without notice. Listeners should seek the input of their own financial, tax, and legal professionals before acting on any of the information provided.